Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Radhika Banka, and today I will be talking to you about COVID-19 management. So, more than dealing with the pandemic itself, we all have been dealing with an infodemic ourselves. And as the WHO Director General, Tedros Ghebreyesus very correctly said at the starting of the epidemic, saying that we're just not fighting an epidemic, we're fighting an infodemic. What is at stake during an outbreak is making sure people will do the right thing to control the disease or to mitigate its impact. So it is not only information to make sure people are informed, it is also making sure people are informed to act appropriately. So what we need right now is, evidence-based management rather than eminence or gut-based management. And what I'm going to try to do in the next 15 to 20 minutes is give you a brief overview of COVID management with what the scientific evidence available is in the most simplest language. So let's start off with the basics. We do know that more than 80% of patients will tend to, where we saw more than 44,000 patients, of which around 81% had a mild illness who recovered without any intervention. Around 14% had severe illness, meaning they needed oxygen support and had shadows on their CT scan, and around 5% were critical. Now, this is data that I've picked up from the BMC dashboard, and this is data from Mumbai. So as of 3 days back, we had around 29 to 30,000 active cases, of which 66% were asymptomatic. 30% were stable who were symptomatic. Of these, only 4% were critical, and death was seen in around 2%. And also when we look at the age distribution and the gender distribution, so we've seen that it's been affecting males more than females. And what we've seen is that this second wave has affected the younger population more. So, the age from 20 to 50 years of age, we've seen almost a 50%, we've almost seen 50% of cases in this population. But what is very reassuring is that the mortality has been really low. So it's been around 0.1% in 20 to 29, 0.3% in 30 to 39, and around 1.1% in the age group between 40 to 49 years. So what I'm trying to say through these slides is that, do not panic if you do get COVID. So the chances of you, getting severe COVID or succumbing from the disease is extremely, extremely, extremely low. So before we go ahead to what works in COVID and what does not, it's just important to understand what exactly happens in COVID. So as you may all be aware that, we've been asked to isolate for almost 14 days. So if we look at the illness in two parts, which is the early part and the late part. So what happens in the early part is that the virus is multiplying within our body, and that's called the viral replication. And as a normal response to that, as a normal phenomenon, our body reacts by fighting the infection. That's why we get fever, we are lethargic, we have malaise, and that's the viral response, which typically occurs for the first 5 to 7 days. After this, what happens is that the virus response has subsided, but there is an inflammatory response in our body, which tends to take place in the second half, which manifests as difficulties in breathing, pneumonia on your CT scans, and then what we call as a cytokine storm. So the reason it's important to know a little bit about this slide is that from this, we know that, treatments that we use in the first half of the illness is anything which is used to decrease the viral replication or the viral multiplication. And any treatments that we use in the second half of the illness is to decrease our own inflammatory body response. So coming to what works and what does not work in COVID, and let's start with what does not work in COVID because that's a longer list. So what does not work? Antibiotics, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, favipiravir or Fabiflu, zinc supplements, vitamin C, and plasma therapy. And we'll just go through briefly with each one of them. Now, for any treatment, whether this is COVID or non-COVID, whether to know it works or not, it's important to test the treatment in a given cohort, in a given population who have the disease, versus not giving the treatment in a similar population. So we look at a cohort A, which has got the treatment, and a cohort B, which has not got the treatment. And then we compare the outcomes between these two cohorts. And that's when we can prove the efficacy or the superiority of the treatment versus the other treatment. And this is what is called a randomized controlled trial. And it is the highest level of evidence to know whether a treatment works or not. So coming to antibiotics. So what do antibiotics do? So antibiotics basically treat bacterial infections. And we all know COVID is a viral infection caused by the coronavirus. So hence, we know that antibiotics will not work for a viral infection. And there's very little rational use for the use of antibiotics in COVID. It may be very rarely needed in people who have a secondary bacterial infection because of COVID. And this is usually seen in patients who are admitted to hospital. And we do have data which says around 8% have a bacterial or fungal co-infection when they are admitted. And this is usually seen in the later stages of the disease. What do antibiotics do? Perhaps they're more harmful because eventually they're going to perpetuate antibiotic resistance in the future. And in the short term, there have been talks about a link to mucormycosis or black fungus because of the injudicious use of antibiotics that has been happening. What about ivermectin? So ivermectin is an anti-parasitic medication. It was used in the early stages of COVID in an attempt to decrease the viral replication. But again, very low certainty of benefit. A lot of randomized controlled trials published. The biggest one very recently published in JAMA, which found that the duration of symptoms was not significantly different for patients who received a 5-day course of ivermectin compared with placebo, and hence do not support the use of ivermectin for treating mild COVID-19. And even the WHO on 31st March has recommended that ivermectin be used to treat COVID-19 only within the setting of clinical trials, and it does not have any recommendations for regular use. Hydroxychloroquine or HCQS or chloroquine that we know, it's a medication used to treat malaria, rheumatoid arthritis, and it has been extensively studied for the treatment and prevention of COVID. And it gained a lot of limelight last year when former US President Donald Trump claimed to have gotten better taking hydroxychloroquine, to which Anthony Fauci very correctly made a statement saying that hydroxychloroquine has to be studied in clinical trials. It might work, but it might not. It might be safe, but it could also hurt patients. And then, as you see, there have been a lot of clinical trials for hydroxychloroquine in mild diseases, in moderate, in patients who were admitted, in patients who've been exposed to COVID as a prophylactic measure, in healthcare workers as a prophylactic measures. And we found no benefit to the extent that WHO does not recommend hydroxychloroquine as a treatment for COVID. The recommendation is based on 30 trials in which hydroxychloroquine was tested on more than 10,000 COVID-19 patients. It did not reduce mortality, the need or duration of mechanical ventilation. What they also noticed was hydroxychloroquine increased the risk of heart rhythm problems, blood and lymph disorders, kidney injury, liver problems, and failure. So not only does WHO not recommend the use of hydroxychloroquine, but it has stopped all clinical trials on hydroxychloroquine. And so hopefully this is the end of HCQS as a treatment for COVID-19. So the next time you do see HCQS or hydroxychloroquine on your prescription for COVID-19, do discuss this with your physician. What about favipiravir or FabiFlu? So it is again an antiviral, which was aimed to prevent viral replication in the early part of the disease, as we discussed earlier. It had shown some efficacy in the SARS pandemic in some Japanese studies. And there has been a small clinical trial which has shown to decrease viral shedding, but has had no impact on clinical outcome or mortality. And very recently, it has also been removed from the ICMR, or the Indian Council of Medical Research, COVID guidelines. What about plasma therapy? So there was a great hypothesis and a great rationale for the use of plasma therapy. So anybody who gets infected with COVID-19 develops antibodies to it, which confer you protection at least for a few months. You take this antibodies, you transfuse it in patients who have active COVID infection. in the assumption that this will protect them from severe disease. What was the reality? This was studied in more than 13,000 patients worldwide. And what did we find? It did not work in any subset of patients, whether it was mild, moderate, or severe COVID. It did not work whether used early in the disease, late in the disease, and it had no effect on any outcome, whether it was mortality, whether it was progression to severe disease. And this was the largest study called the recovery study, which was done in the UK. And this recovery platform has been the center for all of our data that has been recovered for COVID so far. And what did they find? In patients hospitalized with COVID-19, high titer convalescent plasma did not improve survival or any other pre-specified clinical outcomes. And so then there was a lot of hype in the media about plasma therapy not being effective. And it was very, very reassuring to see that finally the ICMR guidelines also dropped convalescent plasma as the treatment therapy. So as we see on the left side of the screen, the same guidelines were published on 22nd April, which recommended convalescent plasma for moderate to severe disease. But the same guideline, when published on 17th of May, removed convalescent plasma as one of the treatment options. So what's important here is that, a lot of people whose, near and dear ones and folks are admitted with COVID right now, please do not waste your energy and your efforts trying to look for harmful plasma, because we know it does not fit. And have regrets of the fact that they could not arrange plasma therapy. Again, do not have any of those regrets or any guilt, because we know this therapy does not work. So what works in COVID? It's a short list. So oxygen, steroids, remdesivir, probably maybe, and we'll discuss why, tocilizumab, and anticoagulation or blood thinners. But what is most important is that these work only in a select population. So coming to steroids. So steroids are anti-inflammatory medications, which are used in a lot of conditions, even in the pre-COVID era. And this is the only drug which has shown to decrease mortality or death in COVID. What dose do we use it in? It's 6 milligrams of dexamethasone or equivalent once a day for 7 to 10 days. And what we saw again from the recovery trial, which was a large UK-based trial, it showed a 33 or a 1/3 reduction in mortality for patients who were on mechanical ventilation, a 20% reduction in mortality for patients who were on oxygen. There was no reduction in mortality for patients not on oxygen. And these results were consistent with possible harm in this group. And benefits were seen when the symptoms were more than 7 days. Now, this fits in very well if we look back in terms of, how COVID evolves. As we did see, the first few days or the first 5 to 7 days is when the virus replicates in our body. Now, if we do give any medications which, suppress our immunity at that stage, which is steroids, our ability of our body to fight against the virus infection is decreased, which tends to have potentially worse consequences later. So what we need to see is that steroids are used only if there's a drop in oxygen level of less than 93%. Do not use them based on your CT severity index. Do not use them based on CRP levels or D-dimer levels. It is more harm if used in patients with normal oxygen levels. And if it is needed, use it at the correct dose, which is 6 milligrams equivalent, which is 40 of Visalon, correct duration of 7 to 10 days. So a lot of injudicious use of steroids has also led to the emergence of the epidemic that we've all called the black fungus or mucormycosis. What about remdesivir? It is an antiviral medication again. It was used in SARS. It was used in Ebola. What has it been used in COVID? So it's the medication with the largest evidence base, meaning a lot of clinical trials have been done with remdesivir. What it has shown is to decrease time to recovery in patients with severe disease. So it reduced your time to recovery from 11 days to a median of 9 days. And it's more useful when used in the first 10 days of the illness because it's an antiviral medication which inhibits viral replication. And again, it's had no effect on mortality so far. So again, its use in COVID has been on thin evidence. And when we see news like this, when 90% of patients in Madhya Pradesh who got fake remdesivir beat COVID, it makes you wonder whether remdesivir has a placebo effect or not. What about tocilizumab? So it is a monoclonal antibody. It may be of benefit in patients with severe COVID. It reduces mortality. It increases hospital discharge, and it reduces the need for ventilation. And this was very recently, we've got some evidence again from the recovery trial published a few weeks back. But again, this medication has a lot of side effects as well. And the most important being risk of secondary infections, including fungal infections. Also, it's expensive and it's not easily available. So how do I treat COVID-19? And for me, currently the answer in India is less is more. So first of all, if you do get symptoms of COVID, do not ignore your symptoms and get tested with RT-PCR. What you need is isolation, rest, adequate hydration, and paracetamol. That's about it. Monitor your oxygen and temperature 3-4 times a day, and do a 6-minute walk test to measure your oxygen levels 1 to 2 times a day. What should be the alarming signs? Your oxygen levels less than 92 to 93% on air. If your fevers persist for more than 7 days, if you develop breathlessness or drowsiness, or there's a drop in oxygen level by 4% or greater on walking for 6 minutes. And this is a really nice slide by the India COVID SOS organization, which gives. So if you do have COVID-19 symptoms, get tested, as we said, check your oxygen levels and temperature 3 to 4 times a day, wear a mask and have your family wear a mask to protect everyone, open your windows for ventilation, stay at home, stay isolated, stay rested, and stay hydrated, and use medications such as paracetamol for fever. If your oxygen levels are more than 92%, what would also help is lying on your stomach or something called proning, which expands the lower part of your lungs and increases the ventilation. And an inhaler called budesonide has been shown to be effective for people with mild COVID in the early stages of their fever. And if your oxygen level is less than 92 to 93, then you do need to consult your physician and get admitted to a hospital soon, because what you would need at that stage is oxygen therapy, steroids, blood thinning injections, with or without remdesivir or tocilizumab, depending on how severe the illness is. And again, very refreshing to see the AIIMS and the ICMR, the interventions such as antibiotics, hydroxychloroquine, favipiravir, ivermectin. And what again is suggested for mild disease is just home isolation and care. For moderate disease, moderate and severe diseases, admission to hospital, operation with or without remdesivir or tocilizumab. And again, a very simple guidelines from the Tamil Nadu government as well for the management protocol of COVID-19, which again, is very evidence-based. Again, for mild illness, just stick to the basics of paracetamol and monitoring. And for moderate and severe, which require hospitalization, stick to oxygen, steroids, blood thinning injections, plus or minus remdesivir or tocilizumab. So there is a lot of information being circulated on social media, on newspapers, but even for the lay public, there's excellent information on very reliable websites. The ICMR, or the Indian Council of Medical Research, the WHO website does a lot of seminars on regular COVID management updates. The NIH, the BMJ, or the British Medical Journal has an entire section on COVID-19 hub for lay people, and also the indiacovidsos.org, which has a lot of reliable, useful information for COVID-19 management. So if you really want to do a little more of reading and want a little more information about COVID-19, its management, I would recommend using any of these websites to get clear information. So what are the take-home messages? So firstly, most patients will have a mild illness. More than 80% will have a mild illness. 10 to 15% will have a moderate illness, and only 4 to 5% will have a critical illness. Do not panic once COVID positive. Isolate yourself and monitor your oxygen and temperature 3 to 4 times a day. Seek medical help when your oxygen levels are below 93%, fever persists for more than 7 days, or you develop symptoms of breathlessness or drowsiness. Medications such as antibiotics, which include doxycycline, azithromycin, hydroxychloroquine or HCQS, favipiravir or Faviflu, ivermectin have no role in COVID management currently. Steroids, remdesivir, and tocilizumab are useful, but only in a select population. And plasma therapy has no role for COVID. Thank you. So I'm going to take some questions from the audience. So if a person has mild fever only for 1 day and then tested positive with no other symptoms, will the person be called asymptomatic or symptomatic? So in this case, you would call the person symptomatic because they've had mild fever. Asymptomatic is somebody who's not had any symptoms whatsoever, and it was just accidentally that they were detected to be positive. If a person has COVID and wants to get treated by Hinduja, is it a walk-in? So it's best you could take a telemed appointment with any of the COVID, with any of the COVID team at Hinduja Hospital. So some more questions. So there are subtle peripheral opacities seen in right, mid, and lower zone in chest X-ray. What does this impression mean? So when you do screen 100 patients with COVID, a fair amount, almost 50 to 60%, will have some changes in the lung based on X-rays or CT scans. But as long as your oxygen levels are absolutely fine, meaning that they're above 93, these shadows do not need any treatment. And we do know that these shadows that we see are not long-term, they're not permanent, and they tend to resolve with time. What medication is required post-recovery? So again, there is no medication required post-recovery. What you need is, again, good hydration, good nutrition. We do know that a lot of people develop a COVID syndrome post-COVID, which includes fatigue, breathlessness. And once you've ruled out causes of breathlessness, such as blood clots, which your physician would have, it's just important to get back to normal living again. Our future is insecure. Any day one can get infected with the virus. That's quite right. I have high BP. Can I get vaccinated? Of course, you can get vaccinated. It's shown to be extremely safe in people who have hypertension. If a person has fever for more than 20 days but no symptoms and all inflammatory parameters are normal, is there anything to worry? So that's a really good question. And we have seen cases of prolonged fever in patients with COVID. And in case if that happens, then it's very important to continuously monitor your oxygen levels, as you correctly said, monitor your inflammatory markers, which are fine, and then seek help from a physician who might want to, investigate this further with a CT scan or want to treat you with some medication. Does steam inhalation really work in reducing viral load? That's a really good question. And the answer probably is no, but that's only based on evidence-based medicine that we've spoken about today. There has been no study to show that steam inhalation helps to reduce viral load. What is monoclonal antibody therapy being discussed in the last few days? And that is tocilizumab that we spoke about its benefit in reducing mortality and in reducing need for mechanical ventilation. But this was again in a select population who have severe to COVID, moderate to severe COVID. How dangerous is COVID for chronic allergic bronchitis patients? So we in fact have seen that patients with asthma and COPD do not tend to do any worse or chronic allergic bronchitis do not tend to do any worse with COVID than the normal population. So it's not that it's more dangerous for patients with chronic allergic bronchitis, but what's important is that you continue to use your medications and the inhalers that have been prescribed to you by your physician. How long do COVID antibodies last? Again, a really great question. And the answer to that is we do not have absolute data on that. And it's set to respond between 6 to 9 months. But again, how protective are these antibodies and at what level are they protective? We do not have much answers to that right now. After recovering from COVID, when should we take the vaccine? So again, great question. To be taken 6 to 8 weeks after you've recovered, unless the Indian guidelines change, which may recommend it after 6 months, but that is still subject to discussion currently. If you've received monoclonal antibodies or plasma therapy for your COVID treatment, then it's recommended that you take the vaccine after 3 months. Should we take vitamin D tablets once a month as prescribed by physician? Will it help in COVID prevention? Again, no data to show that vitamin D has any role in COVID prevention. Can we give steroids in the beginning of the COVID if patient shows severe symptoms? So if your severe symptoms include a drop in your oxygen saturation below 93%, then yes. But if the severe symptoms just are fever and general lethargy and fatigue, then no. After negative report, when can we go for second vaccination? Covishield, so right now the current recommendation for Covishield is a gap of 12 to 16 weeks after you've taken your first dose. I am a cancer patient, can I take the vaccine? Yes, absolutely, you can take the vaccine. If you are on active chemotherapy, then it might be best to consult with your oncologist. After hospitalization and subsequent recovery, the side effects, if any, of the medications can be seen in a patient for how long? So it depends on what medications you've been given. For most, if you've been treated with steroids, remdesivir, these are all short-term treatment for 7 to 10 days. But if you have had long-term treatment with steroids, then you can develop complications such as diabetes or muscle weakness or black fungus. But apart from that, you shouldn't really see any side effects of medications per se. Do multivitamins help in prevention, especially Zincovit? So again, no data to show that Zincovit helps. And also WHO has recommended against the use of multivitamins. When to start with blood thinners? So blood thinners, again, great question. So that's recommended for people who are admitted in hospital with moderate to severe COVID. Currently no role for anticoagulation at home. But again, it might have to be discussed on a case-to-case basis with your physician, depending on your age, your bleeding risk factors, and your D-dimer levels. What factors are associated with severe COVID? Great question. So we know that increasing age, obesity, risk factors such as heart problems, active cancer are all risk factors for severe COVID. I want to know if we can mix the two vaccines over first shot and second shot. So currently there is no data in India to suggest that we can mix Covishield and Covaxin. There have been some reports from Spain about mixing Pfizer and Covishield, but so far nothing available in India so far. Patient post-COVID requiring oxygen minimally and post-cabbage 5 years back, having persistent cough. What is the remedy now? A lot of factors. It could be acid reflux. It could be viral reactivity of your airways post the infection. So I would suggest getting in touch with your physician. Why is there such a huge difference in gaps between 2 doses of Covishield and Covaxin? Which one should be preferred? Again, coming to the second part first, which one should be preferred? I don't think that there's any point of vaccine shopping. All of these vaccines have shown an efficacy of above 70%, which is what is needed. Huge difference in gaps is because the studies were designed in such a way that Covishield showed improved efficacy when taken at a gap of 12 to 16 weeks, whereas Covaxin or the Bharat Biotech vaccine showed better efficacy when taken at a duration of 4 weeks. Do vaccines generate T-cell immunity? Those cannot be checked on antibody tests. So is there a need to even check those? Great question. So vaccines do not so vaccines do generate T-cell immunity, but we, as you correctly said, we cannot measure that on antibody tests. So routinely, there is no point of measuring antibodies following vaccination or following immunization or following an infection. They might be useful only in a certain selective population. Alarming D-dimer value to start blood thinners, that's a great question. And I think we do not have any consensus on that so far, but generally recommended anything above 3 to 5 times the upper limit of normal. But again, that would depend on a lot of factors, including age, if the patient is on other blood thinners such as Ecosprin, clopidogrel, the risk of bleeding, and their other comorbidities. Sorry, I am still trying to go through a few more questions. Two weeks after taking vaccine, should one take antibody test to be sure if the vaccine worked? I would not recommend that because again, antibody levels, we do not know what level of antibodies give us protection and for how long do they last. And even if the levels are low right now, there is no recommendation to take a booster dose. So I do not think there is any role for measurement of antibodies after vaccination. My wife is breastfeeding for a 1-year-old child. Can she take the vaccine? Great question. So right now, again, no recommendation in India to take the Covishield or the Covaxin for lactating women, as we've not got enough data. The Pfizer and Moderna have published some results about efficacy and safety in lactating women. So currently, as of now in India, I would not recommend it for lactating. So after 18 days of contracting COVID, if the patient sometime gets fever, 99.2 to 99.5, what needs to be done? So again, in this case, really great. It would depend on the age of the patient, whether they've been vaccinated, what are the inflammatory markers, oxygen levels. And depending on that, then you perhaps need to take a more informed call about any need for treatment. Steam inhalation works in load reduction or prevention. We've spoken about that. So again, no evidence for that. My daughter-in-law was not given any treatment for COVID as she is being kidney transplant patient, was already on steroids. So if you do need steroids, generally for kidney transplant is a much smaller dose as compared to what is needed for COVID. So in case if you do need steroids, meaning if your oxygen levels are below 93%, then it might be worthwhile to increase the dose of your steroids, but obviously in recommendation with your transplant physician. The monoclonal antibody cocktail launched by Roche, this might be a miracle drug. And what about molnupiravir by Merck? Do we have data for that? Great question. Again, very, very small trials done looking for both of them, looking in moderate to severe illness. And there has been some evidence to show about the monoclonal antibody cocktail having some effect on mortality. But again, the numbers are really small and these medications are not easily available. So I think we need larger prospective controlled trials before we can draw up any answers. How effective is FabiFlu tablets against COVID? So FabiFlu, as we spoke, is favipiravir. And we know that it did not, so it's just shown to decrease your viral shedding in the first half of the illness, but it's got absolutely no effect on clinical outcomes or mortality or progression to moderate or severe disease. So right now there is no role for FabiFlu. But again, there a lot of clinical trials in place, and hopefully we might have some answers towards the end of the year. So great. I think we've a very interactive session. It was great to see all of you all here. As I said, the most important thing to prevent this pandemic is vaccination. So please get yourselves vaccinated as soon as possible, and once you are eligible for vaccination, and continue the masks, continue the therapies for social distancing, isolation, wearing masks, and being vigilant about your symptoms of COVID. So that's about it. So thank you everybody for all your attention, and look forward to seeing you again. Thanks. Bye.